Hello, and welcome to the Special Needs Sibling Podcast, where we talk about what life is really like as a sibling to someone with special needs. I'm your host, Charlene, and today our guest is Cheryl. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So I think you were one of the first people that either I found or you found me on Instagram. So that was really exciting because I was like, oh, like someone likes my account. So that was really exciting. So I really appreciate that.
Oh, no worries.
Yeah. So since you're here, so could you lay out your family structure, kind of like you, your siblings, who has a disability, and a little bit about the person with the disability?
Sure. My name is Cheryl Albright. I am the youngest of just me and my brother. So my brother is 4 years older than I am. His name is James, and he has autism and is non-speaking.
Cool. My sister speaks a little bit, but not in full sentence structure. So I kind of feel some of your pain in the kind of the non-communicative area. Um, and so one of the interesting things that we had talked about before we were recording was that you had actually been on various interviews and some blogs and stuff, and you actually have your own blog, which I'm sure that will come up later. And so there are things that I actually want to talk to you about. But was there anything that you wanted to bring up before I jump into me asking you questions?
No, you can go. You can go right ahead. It's fine.
Cool. So one of the things that I kind of thought was interesting when we are talking was just kind of we can either start with kind of the parent sibling dynamic or kind of like the therapy holistic healing kind of journey that you've kind of been on. Um, so wherever or however you want to correct, yeah.
I'm sure one leads into the other. So yeah, I it was just the two of us growing up. My mom left when we were 12, and so then my brother went into a group home at 16. And so as far as like parent sibling relationship, he was closest with my father because he tried doing it alone for a while and just couldn't do it. He's got too many high needs, and as a teenager he had even more needs. And so this is so remember when he was diagnosed, I call it pre-Rayman, so before 1980. And so the
Mm-hmm.
services and things and people's thoughts and perceptions around autism are very different. At the time it fell under the diagnosis of MR, which is not even something they use anymore. It's intellectual disability.
Okay.
And so they just assumed that he couldn't learn things. And so he wasn't even potty trained until he went into the group home.
Oh
And
wow, that's crazy.
because they just didn't think that that was a thing, they didn't think that was
Yeah.
possible. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And so, level of high needs, he is Houdini. He can get out of anything, he can unlock anything, he can get out of the house. I mean, I
Yeah.
don't have children and drive a minivan because it has more safety features on it. So he cannot get out of the car unless I open the door.
Oh, interesting. Oh, yeah, because you have like you can lock the doors from any door and any place, and like oh, that's so interesting. Huh. Okay.
And yeah, so I mean, he had a very, you had to keep your eyes on him 24/7. So
Mm-hmm.
I was kind of left to my own devices, which I know a lot of sibs can relate to. It's just there was nobody else though. So there's that. And on the blog, I term the definition, unintentional neglect, where,
Mm-hmm.
some of us to an extent do get neglected, not maliciously, only because the needs of the other child or children were higher and you just had to figure things out on your own. And as a teenager, that's probably not the greatest. So
Yeah.
there was definitely had some rough years in there, and went to college, became an occupational therapist, ended up back in my near my hometown. And I kind of got to a point in my couple of years out in my career where I was like, now what? Like this is it? Like this is all I'm supposed to be doing? Like
Yeah.
I don't I don't really get it. I did have a rough time with drugs and alcohol, and so I was looking for something. I didn't know what that something was.
Okay.
And and I don't I mean, I had a good group of friends. I had a good job. It wasn't, but it was like, now what? This
Yeah,
is
like
life.
on
Like,
paper you have everything that you could
right.
want, but
Or
it's like
need.
what's
Yeah.
yeah. Mhm.
So it was kind of like, now what? And I remember I would start going back to school and start other degrees and then never finish them, and it was kind of like I didn't know what I was looking for. It was just kind
Mhm.
of like, I don't know. And my accountant of all people was like, "Well, you keep going back to school, but this year you're not in school and you need a tax write-off that's kind of similar. So go find some continuing ed course that is kind of a bigger expense than you normally would." And
That's
I was like, "All right."
interesting. Yeah.
I was like, "Okay." And so back in
Yeah.
the day, we used to get these circulars called OT practice. They had them for PT and speech and all the allied health professions, but they had continuing ed in the back of them, like kind of like a
Oh, like at
newspaper.
the end.
Yeah,
Yeah. Okay.
but that's what it felt like. Like the paper was that kind of like newspapery kind of.
Yeah.
And so yoga for the special child was in there, and I was like, "Ooh, a week in Florida. Okay." Like I had no idea what I was walking into or
Yeah.
what had happened really. And I've been studying with them ever since then. That was in 2009. And so even after the first week, I was off of some of my medications and was like, what is this? And then I was like, well, clearly it's doing something, so I'm going to go home and keep trying it.
Yeah.
And I just kept doing it for me. It was the first time I had done something for me. and
Ah, yes.
and
Yeah. I know
it
that
was
feeling.
and it was actually about me and trying to figure it out. And so, I kept going. And after 6 months, I was off of pretty much everything. And I was like, okay, there's something crazy to this. Like, I don't understand. So then I started trying to figure out, like, what is it that it's doing for myself while teaching a few others and at the job that I worked for. And I just kept going. And, 14 years later, I'm with my own private practice in Florida and use yoga as my primary modality for helping others.
Yeah.
And yeah, and and I also run SibShops out of it. It's kind of turned into my passion project. So those children that have a brother or sister with a disability that desperately need a community that I did not
Yeah.
have
Right.
now have a place to come and be. And they don't even really have to even tell their story. They just all know that they're there for the same thing.
Yeah.
And they and generally have a good time where there's afternoon that's about them
Yes.
and not and not about other things at home.
Yeah, and it's interesting. Well, for me, because I never got to go to a sib shop. Well, one, I didn't know they existed until I was probably in college, and then I learned that they existed in general, and I was like, oh, had I had that when I was a kid, probably would have loved it. Because then you have like friends who actually understand what you're talking about, or not even friends, but you're just like in a class that someone actually understands what you're saying, or you don't have to like think about it because you all have that in common. But it's this thing where as I see them now, sometimes it's like for me it's this thing where I feel like a lot of times it's like, oh, if you're 12 and under, they're really great because you're a kid, you're kind of with your family, you get to meet other kids, and then there's a space that's kind of lacking when they get older. But the other difference is that you are a sib versus I feel like there are sib shops that are kind of run by non-sibs. But I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
I do. The Center for Autism and Related Disorders in a county just north of me does run them to a point. They specifically, you have to have autism or related disorder. The sibling has to have autism or related disorder to go.
Okay.
Whereas I'm open to anything. It could be a mental
Yeah.
illness, it could be a physical disability, it could be whatever. And they're not sibs, and so I don't know. Like I remember when I didn't know what they were.
Mm-hmm.
I literally showed up at the Sibling Leadership Network conference in, I think it was 2019. They were in St. Paul.
Okay.
There was a thing that came across my Facebook feed one time. It was like, "Oh, there's this conference that's just for siblings," and I went, "Excuse me." Had no idea
Yeah.
what this organization was. Or And it was funny because a few months prior I had reached out to the Sibling Support Project just looking to see if there was any support networks for adult sibs in Florida.
Yeah.
And they got me in touch with the Florida Sibling Alliance. I just didn't realize I was talking to the Don Meyer. I had no idea who he was.
Oh, that's crazy. Like, I
He
mean,
had,
I mean, who he
he
is
was,
now, but like, yeah. I mean, you don't know. You don't know.
I didn't know. Just this man
Yeah.
from the organization emailed me back and was like, "Here, check this out." I was like, "Okay, thank you."
Yeah.
And I was looking to start my own for kids, not knowing that there was a curriculum already out there. And so when I went to the conference,
Okay.
they're like, "Hey, we do." Emily got up and was announced that she was the new president of the organization and said, "Hey, I do run these, run trainings." And so 3 months later, I'm on a plane to Texas going, "Okay, let's do this thing."
Oh wow.
And, it was just like, and that was at a time where, my father wasn't doing well. I was running between here and New York. And I was like, what's an extra stop in a time zone over at this point?
Right.
Practically living on a plane. Like, I
Yeah.
think that summer I had no idea what time zone I was in or what was
Yeah.
happening. But
You kind of like wake up, get on a plane, go to sleep, eat dinner, shower somewhere in there, and then like next day.
it was
Yeah.
crazy. But anyway, we made it happen. I think it was right before one of my brother's meetings. So, because, Midland, Texas is on the way to Rochester, New York in some
Yeah.
weird capacity on an airplane. But yeah, it was interesting. So I was probably one of the only sibs that went. So they had me sit on the adult panel of
Oh,
other siblings that were
interesting.
local. Yeah, it was interesting.
That's
Like people were just
like
trying to bring it to their organizations, and my husband went with me.
okay.
More of he works in the foster care system, so kind of how you were
Okay.
going to bridge that gap between like foster and biological siblings.
Yeah.
Um, I don't separate those out. If it's a foster sib that has a disability, people are more than welcome. Like
Yeah.
I don't really turn people away
Yeah.
if it's a need. And it it was just kind of like one thing. When things are supposed to fall, like I don't believe in a whole lot of woo woo stuff, but everything like kind of fell into that. And then 2020 happened, so SibShops didn't happen until 2021, I think.
Oh, okay.
I try to partner with other organizations. I mean, I run my own small business, so I was like, hey, is there a nonprofit that would like to partner up, and I couldn't get any
Mhm.
traction with other people. I said, screw it. And then I was sharing an office at the time, so I found my own office and said, we're going to do this now.
Oh, there you go. When all else fails, just do it yourself. That's like,
Isn't that a sib thing? Like,
yeah, yeah, so very much so. Because I remember when when you told me about the conference from the Sibling Leadership Network, I was like, they have a conference because I knew they existed, but it was this thing where when I was trying to look at resources, I was kind of going in loops a little bit because they're all connected, but it's like they're just really big too, which I get, but it
I don't
yeah.
think they used to. So what they used to do is they would piggyback with the American Association for Intellectual and Developmental Disabilities. They have a conference every year. And so I guess
Oh, I see.
yeah, SLN would do every other year. So they would do the weekend before the other conference started. And the
Yeah.
last one that was in person was 2019. 2021, uh, it was the only conference I went to that summer where I didn't have any responsibilities. That changed. 2021, I was there virtually, but I led a yoga class to help de stress some of the SIBs. And I'm
Yeah.
sure I didn't, they got a new president. And so
Oh,
I did,
okay.
so they didn't do I haven't heard anything, to be quite honest, but
Okay.
I haven't heard anything about the conference. And usually it's June-ish. So I'm guessing that's they're either not having one or they're trying to revamp and figure out what it is that they're going to do. I
Yeah.
will agree there's some bonuses to having it online because then there's people from literally all over the world. And
Yeah.
so that was really nice. And just having the ability, because a lot of people wouldn't be able to travel, right? And so
Mhm.
it was just, that was nice. And then Don did like a special like cooking with Don, and we all made dinner together like virtually,
Oh.
and like
Yeah.
I thought it was a good time. I don't know, I don't know about anybody else, but like I still had a good time. So I hope they bring back the in person. I know they've been doing a lot of online like symposiums, and I
Yeah.
spoke on one. Forget what it was for though. Is that our careers? I don't remember, but um, yeah. So I try to stay somewhat involved, and they have a podcast as well. So
Yeah.
definitely have been listening to that, and yeah, we'll see what happens.
Yeah, there's just so much stuff, like as I've been talking with a lot of siblings, it's interesting the different, like, good and bad that comes with being a sibling, because it's so different for everyone, but yet it's very much a camaraderie thing of we feel the very like similar pain points at the same time, even though like it can be different, because
Mm-hmm.
even though like, but yeah, so even though, so my parents stayed married, um but it's interesting because as I've gotten older, kind of when you're talking about like, the trying to finding something to fill like this hole that you didn't know what it was. And it's interesting because I feel like more recently, probably like, probably after I moved out of my parents' home, it's this thing where I also feel like it's like a different space that I needed to find for me. And it's taken a little bit to kind of go through all the, this all the stuff that you kind of deal with when you live with your sibling and your parents, and then you kind of have to that it translates into like your adulthood. And I think navigating that space has been a little bumpy to say the least.
What I found difficulty was in transitions. Like I did okay going to college. Like college, I was like, heck yeah, let's get out. Like I was
Yeah.
good and ready to go. I went 14 hours away from home. Like I was
Okay.
like out the door and running.
Yeah.
But then after I finished, there was I had this really hard time with like that life transition, like transitioning into okay, you're not in school anymore. This is life,
Yes.
and that what
Yeah.
is life going to mean? And I just don't think for a while I didn't talk about it. Like I might have mentioned something to my classmates in OT school that was like, "Oh
Mhm.
yeah, I have a brother on the spectrum," and it was like, "Oh okay," and that was it.
Yeah.
Like there wasn't really I don't think until social media, I don't think many of us used our voices. Like I know I didn't. I didn't start my blog until
Oh, interesting.
um yeah, I didn't start my blog until the pandemic, and it was more of
Oh, I didn't know it was that recent that you had started it. I thought you had it for like
mm,
slightly longer than that. But oh, I didn't realize that. Okay.
no, it was maybe just before shutdown, and it was more of like I needed a place to just vomit anything that came to my brain. So the
Yeah.
first couple ones were more of just whatever thought or anything that was bothering me just kind of came up. I just kind of it's like an
Mm.
online diary. And then I
Yeah.
branched out and had other, siblings come on and tell their
Mhm.
stories, or, another sib that became um, a financial planner. He's writing a piece for me now, and another, there was another a law firm even reached out to me and was like, "Hey, can
Oh
we
wow.
share this information?" It was just the difference between Social Security and Social Security disability, and I was like, "Absolutely," because I don't know anything about that. And
Yeah, it's like I didn't know that that was a difference, but it makes sense that it is now when I think about the conversation I would have with my parents. But it doesn't cross your mind until you have to deal with it. Like,
I don't and some of it was my father got sick in January of 2019 and then passed in October of 2020, and so
okay,
I was that caregiver. It was the ultimate club sandwich issue, and I didn't.
okay,
It was like, okay, so now we got this, and I was taking care of my father, and I couldn't get my brother down. I couldn't do it both at the same time, right? And so
okay.
got my father here settled, got him into an assisted living facility, and then got my brother down here the first weekend of March of 2020,
Oh
uh,
my gosh.
and was like, okay, here we go. Um, yeah, no,
Yeah.
but that December of 2019, the group home's calling and saying we had to admit him to the hospital. He's having issues with tachycardia. And I was like, okay, yeah, no, we're not leaving him up there
Yeah.
anymore. Um, Me and Southwest got real tight as far as I feel like I was just using them as my own personal jet at that point.
Yeah.
Um, and it was rough. And it was like, okay. I mean, I was probably in brain fog for a good 3 years.
Yeah, and it's like even without that, it was already hard for people as it was, and then now you're dealing like with your dad and your brother and moving them and like deal with whatever chaos that is in
Entailed
existence.
with all of that. And then,
Yeah.
somebody, it was funny on the SLN podcast, somebody had said, and then the condiments are like all the systems and things you need to learn. So I had to become my brother's rep payee. What does that mean? Just like all of the other systems, I had to learn
Yeah.
the state of Florida's way of doing things.
Oh
And,
right, yes. Because
I,
every state has their own method of whatever they're doing. Yeah.
if they have, a waiver, a Medicaid waiver, what that looks like, and what,
Yeah.
it was just, I saw the writing on the wall. So for me personally, I made a plan long, but my father wouldn't talk about it. He was like, nope, I'm fine. I'm like,
Oh,
okay,
all right.
you've, you've had 7 heart ablations. You need to have this,
Oh my
like,
gosh.
you need to have something in writing and a pacemaker. Like, you're
Yeah.
not, you're not invincible here. Like,
Yeah.
and what is guardianship? What does guardianship mean? What are the responsibilities that you have with that? How does every state deal with
Yeah.
that differently? Do you have to inform the state? Do you, like, what? There was just so many different things. And so prior to even that, some of the nonprofits I work with would come, would have a financial planner, an attorney
Mhm.
come in and talk about these things for the clients. And I would always like, can I come? I know it's like for
Yeah.
parents, but
Yeah.
like, is that okay? And they're like, sure. And I frantically would take notes, follow up with the speaker, and be like, okay, then we taught, and then found an attorney to just have on standby.
That's yeah, cuz were you on the paperwork for your brother before all of the stuff that happened? Oh, okay.
No, and so because when he turned 18, I wasn't old enough to be on his paperwork.
Oh, okay.
I
Right.
was only 14, and so they couldn't have a minor listed as,
Yeah.
so my uncle was the next one in line who had dementia that could not stand
Oh.
in front of a court of law and
Oh.
make a decision for
Oh
anybody.
no. Yeah.
And so I'm on yelling at an attorney's office because I had reached out maybe 6 months prior to him being sick and was like, this is something you need to do. Like, you
Yeah,
just
it's an
need to add
issue.
me, like,
Yeah.
just add me as
Yeah.
the next person in line. Like, and then as things got closer, I called the attorney. I was like, can we make it co-guardian? So that if anything happens, I don't have to show up in court in New York and say, I don't have to go to court. Like, we don't have to do this again. Like,
Yeah, yeah, you know the yeah, right.
so he would just fall off, and then I would be on there, and it's not a separate court proceeding, which is
Yes.
usually not something they do. But in this circumstance, it made sense.
Yeah.
And I just remember talking to the paralegal, like, I don't understand the rush. And I was like, something is going, like, I knew probably 3 months prior to him actually being in the hospital. I was like, something's going on. I don't know what it is, but I'm
Yeah.
telling you. And two, it's none of your business. It's your job. Get it done. Like, I need to be
Yeah.
added. Like, why are we
Yeah,
having this
like you're gonna
conversation
pay
right now?
them and they're gonna do like I don't why is there a conflict of interest?
So then I'm yelling at somebody from an ICU room from the law firm, going, this should have been dealt with. Long story short, they did get it filed prior to his
Yeah.
passing, but it was just like, are you kidding me right now? And, so then I like to share these conversations with the parents that I work with because it's like,
Yeah.
you need to have a plan. Tomorrow is not guaranteed. Even
Right.
though, here in Florida is like a 22,000 plus wait list for services.
Oh my
Um,
gosh.
yeah, no.
That's
Well,
yeah.
we'll leave Florida
Yeah,
politics
yeah,
out of
we'll
this
leave that out. Yeah,
podcast.
exactly. Yeah, we'll leave that part out of it. But
We'll
yeah,
leave that part out of it. But there is, there's certain, and I tell them, I was like, tomorrow's not guaranteed. So if you end up in the hospital incapacitated,
yep,
something, at least there's a file somewhere that
yep,
says you've
exactly.
applied
Yep.
and that you're on the wait list, and then it
Hmm.
becomes a crisis and they can escalate it. So
Yeah.
having just that, like, surprisingly enough, the paperwork's really not that bad. Like, I was surprised. Like, I was expecting like this novel that I was gonna
Oh
have to
yeah,
fill out.
like you.
And I was like, oh, the application's pretty simple and proof of diagnosis and we're in a state ID. That's it. I was like, okay, I can.
Oh
This is
yeah,
doable.
like I can
This is
provide that.
doable.
Like it's yeah, I have the paperwork for. Yeah, it's kind of like if you set the bar at a certain, if you just have really low expectations, then you can only be pleasantly surprised after that because it's your expectations are so bad. Which I feel like all siblings on some level have that inherently built in, right? Like I go into a situation, I'm just like these things are just gonna be bad and happen, and then sometimes they don't happen. I'm like oh. And then my husband makes fun of me because he's like, see, it's not that bad. But other times, I'm
Mine does the
right. And
same
I'm
thing.
like, right? Yeah, like it's just, I feel like it's built in because you just don't know. You don't know if your sibling's gonna like run away, they're gonna throw a tantrum, they're just gonna be really happy and just like have a good time. And they're like, oh, I was worried for no reason. Yeah, I don't know. Like, it was funny because so when I got married, it was this thing where my parents said, "Hey, like, don't worry, we'll take care of Angela and like whatever they had to do to make sure she was okay." Well, she was fine, but the one that cracks me up was we were at dinner, and then so the DJ has music going, right? Everyone's like walking around, dancing, eating, whatever, and so my parents are like, they're starting to freak out because they're like, "Oh, where did she go?" Right, and then they're like asking their friends, and I'm like standing right there with my husband, and we're like, she's fine, she's right there, she's just like dancing, having a good time. And it's like, yeah, like you just don't know, like it's a that is a
We learn to
journey.
catastrophize things. Like, I think
Yeah,
that's part of it, is just because you don't know what you don't know, and you
yeah,
don't know how, nobody knows how the next minute's going to play out. So it just becomes intensified. I think we were at my brother's house this past weekend, and we got him to use his tablet and he asked for a ride. So I was like, okay, let's go for a ride. Like, no big
yeah,
deal. Like, it was just like, he was nice and calm and like bopping in the car
yeah,
to the music, and I was like, okay, that was all right. Like, I was
yeah.
expecting more of like a fit that we didn't go get something to eat, or,
Yeah,
something. But no, he was just happy to be out riding around. We went and drove by the water, and you
yeah.
know,
I,
yeah.
I don't know. Yeah, the last time I saw my sister, I think it was like this mix of like she was happy and then she got upset, which I think she was more upset at her routine, not so much me. But it's just this thing where like, oh, like I don't know. It's all everything is unknown. I feel like, but it also it's like it confuses me, but I still love her. But it's confusing. But like I have my own stuff to work through. I don't know. There's a lot of complexity like in that.
Yeah, yeah, I could. Yep.
Yeah, and then your mom's been like out of the picture for a while. Like your mom's still alive, but she's been out of the picture for you for a while, I think, right?
Correct.
Okay. Yeah. That well, I'm sure that's its own kind of whatever
That's
you
its
want to talk
own
about, then talk
hour
about.
and
Yeah. Okay.
or longer.
That is fair. That's why I just wanted I want to bring up more so that in general kind of people I think that for me the diversity of just like where siblings are at and their parent
Yeah,
situation is just important to recognize. So we can just recognize that she's not in the picture. We can kind of like, I think it's just good for people to hear that there are siblings that's just all different. Like you had to move a lot. They had to move. Like
right.
yeah, that's all.
Yep.
Yeah,
Nope. Get it. Totally get it.
nice, cool. Um, what other? I don't know. I feel like that was most of the things that I had in mind. Um, but did you have anything else?
No, I just hope that, the more podcasts and the more sibling voices that are out there. I mean, I don't I don't do TikTok. My husband informs me, but there's so many sibs on TikTok. I'm like, okay.
Oh,
Not
I
my
didn't know that
generation.
either. I don't. Yeah,
Not my
I.
not my generation. I don't. I'm gonna date myself for a minute, but like that's not. I mean, I find a few on Instagram. That's
Yeah.
like where we met. It's
Mhm.
where I found the Global Autism Project. It's where I found the sibling. There's other sibs out there that are
Yes.
either running their own business or other occupational therapists or BCBAs, behavior board certified behavior analysts. I forget that sometimes I talk in medical terms and people don't know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Um, and it's it or there's a lot that are social workers. Um, and finding your tribe is kind of important. I mean, SibNet on Facebook. I don't know if you've had a chance to join that yet, but there's um, just like I think they've got over
There's
6,000
a lot of
sibs.
sibs on there. Yeah.
I mean, and there's a lot of, you know, people go through a lot. I'm going to leave it at that because it
Yeah.
is supposed to be a closed group. Sorry, parents, you are not allowed.
Right.
Which is like that. I don't use it as much anymore, but when I was going through everything with my father and stuff, it was a really nice place to not only vent but like get support from like, oh, I've
Mm.
been there. This is, try this or do that. Or I
Yeah.
was looking before I started back traveling internationally again last year, trying to figure out like how to link a prepaid debit card to my brother's trust. So if they wanted money to go out or something and I wasn't around, that
Oh,
I could do something from like an
that.
app or
Yeah.
something.
I have to keep that in
And
mind. That's a. I never had thought about that as an option, so I will. I will keep that in mind.
so
Yeah.
it's a true link card. You can connect it to an account or you can, and the nice thing is it's like a spying tool too. I will
Yeah,
pay
because you can
$12.
watch all the transactions, right?
That's right. I know when he's
Yeah.
left the house, he hasn't left the house, what he's been doing, what he went to go
Yeah.
eat, when he's gone clothes shopping. Like I can
Yeah.
literally see everything and go, oh, there was a spike in behavior in April. Well, nobody took him out. And this is why I
Then
know.
yeah.
Yeah. And it's it's funny because I was like, I people complain about the fee, but I was like, I will pay you $12 a month to spy on um, what they're doing. And that just keeps me kind of in the loop without going, what'd you do this week? Did you take them out? Did you do this? Did you do that? I don't have to do
Yeah.
that. And when I'm traveling, I can't do that anyway. So I, or because it's usually working. Like I'm not,
Oh, right.
a lot of
Yeah.
it's not, not all fun, not all fun, some fun, but not all. And I wanted just something quick so I could look to see, oh, we're having an issue. Or if they were doing a special trip. If they said, hey, we're going to go to Disney. All right, here's $100. Like,
Yeah.
have fun. Like, and
Yeah. And go
it
enjoy
does,
yourself.
yeah, yeah. It was an easy way to kind of spy on the situation, sort of, kind of. And it just kind of made me feel better. And I didn't have to like the house manager didn't have to worry about would there
Yeah.
be funds or not, or um, so the way they had it, what ended up, he had both the able account's pretty much spent out now. So when the government gave the COVID relief funds,
Mhm.
we had all this extra money, and the money can't sit there, even though Medicaid said, "Oh no, it won't get." But we're still not allowing you to have more than $2,000 in this account. And I'm like, well, then you keep giving me COVID relief funds. What am I
Yeah.
supposed to do with it? I'm like, I can't
Yeah. You
spend
can't sit.
it
Yeah. You can't do
fast enough.
anything with it. Yeah.
So I opened an able account and then have just gradually spent it down on anything that he needed.
Yeah.
I we privately pay for the psychiatrist. That's my own trust issues with the system.
Okay.
Um, and those kind of things. So if he needed anything, really,
Yeah.
I every calming tool you can think of, I got him essential oils. I could do all the things that from afar that I knew that I
Yeah.
could and have the a means to do that. And then when my father passed, this is a note to parents: don't do it this way. He put the trust in the will, so then I had to go try to figure
Ooh.
out how to set up
Okay.
a trust, and then the estate couldn't be closed until that part of the will was fulfilled. Don't do
Oh,
don't
that's
do that. get the trust ahead of time. And
Yeah. The, oh, that's interesting. Yeah, because my parents just have they have a living trust, and that's how they've set it up. Because they probably, yeah, to avoid what you just described.
so it was like, oh, okay. But then nobody told me how do I take money out of the trust? Like, how am I supposed to, like, how do I get funds so that he can go do whatever he wants to go do?
Yeah.
And so finally it was on Subnet. They're like, oh, try TrueLink. This is what we do. And then confirmed with the attorney saying, is this acceptable? Can I,
Yeah. Right. Right.
like,
Yeah.
I recommend it to all my guardians. You're fine. And I was like, perfect. And so I
Oh.
set it up and was like, here you go. And so
Yeah.
it's a prepaid debit card.
Right,
So
which is
I
fine,
have
but it makes it easy because you can control it. Then you don't have to worry about like they've overspent under because you literally can't overdraft or anything because it's literally once it runs out, it's run out. That's it. Which is yeah, because that's something I had thought about before. Because the whole thing was I remember when my parents set up when we talked about conservatorship and then they set up the living trust. It was very much like if they're both incapacitated, I would have to like it's on me, right? And because that could be through anything, it could be car accident, plane crash, like that could be anything. Like
yep.
it doesn't matter what causes it. And so I remember I was like, when we become adults, because at that time I was probably like 20, and so I was like, oh, like a lot later, I'm like, oh, how would the how does the money work? Because at some point, like she has to live, but like I want her to enjoy herself. But if I want to spend time with her, like all that money has to be routed somewhere. But prepaid debit cards is a great yeah, because especially now, because at the time I wouldn't have predicted that I am 600 miles away from her, right? That could change whenever, but the fact that I'm not literally in the same room, same house, whatever, like I do have to be able to still manage it, but from any type of distance.
And I would say,
Also,
and that's also, I hear people like balk about the fees, but like peace of mind for me, I was like, I pay more than that. Like,
yeah,
fine. Like,
yeah,
okay, it's just, and I had no idea, but that's kind of what those support groups are like. I feel like are for like, hey, I
yeah.
have this question. I don't know how to fix this issue. I know what I'm looking for, but I don't. Can somebody did
But
anybody
yeah,
else
has
set
anyone
up
done it? Yeah,
right? And that I really think is the biggest thing. Like, how are people doing it? And so now even his old group home back in New York, thank God, shut down. Different story for a different day.
okay,
But the nurse reached out and she said, hey, we've got this family moving to Florida. Do you mind if I give them your contact information? And so in the blog I put, how to apply for med waiver, what qualifies for crisis, how to
mm-hmm.
apply for Medicaid in the state of Florida, and then Q&A that came after that, like after I
Yeah,
posted and people were asking questions. So then I went back and answered those.
okay,
Um, yeah, I mean that's what it was for. It was just so that I didn't have to keep reinventing the wheel. I can just send people a link. Here, do this.
yes, yep,
This doesn't work. Come back to me with questions. And that was kind of more. Now it's being turned into a book, but the it was just kind of it was a place to vomit whatever was going on in my brain. But also, like, these are all the things that I had to do. Like, what is
yeah,
a rep payee? What is the what are the expectations of a rep payee? Like, what does that mean? And honestly, it doesn't really mean anything other than you're in control of their social security
right.
funds and how it's it was just like nobody
But
who
at the
was I
time, like you don't know what that is. Like I have to know what that is. Like yeah, yeah,
right. And so and before moving him across state lines he needed to have like an address here in order to get a driver's license. So the rep payee, all the social security information started coming to me, and then a bank account. So then I had two documents that said he lived here. So when I went and
right,
took him to the DMV to get a state issued ID, I had everything. But
yeah,
it took time to accumulate all of the right documents. Like, it's not just like, oh yeah, I flew up one day, grabbed him, and came back. It's not. No.
yeah. And I think like when you, or at least for me, like when I thought about it when I was younger, I used to be very much that's how it was in my head. Like oh, like it can't be that complicated because X Y Z. But then there's just so much. Yeah, there's just a lot. I think there's just a lot of stuff that you just don't realize that needs to be done until you have to actually go do it. if it hasn't
And
already been done, right, or
right,
set
and I
up.
wasn't the one that set up Social Security, so that's why I was glad the one
Yeah.
attorney, like, reached out to me and said, "Hey, can I write some," I was like, "Absolutely," because I don't know how to guide people on
Yeah.
that because it was already done. So, it was just meant to kind of be a sounding board, and, I've had other sibs that have written for me, and they've gotten
Mhm.
some clapbacks from their parents and things like that. So now I've got some that are like a little nervous, and I was like, no, you you have a right to every emotion that comes to your brain
Yes.
and what you've been through, and
Yes.
it's how you perceived the situation and not
Yes.
the way you're being told it was. Like,
100%.
that, I mean, if anybody gets anything out of this conversation, it would probably be that. Like, we
Yeah.
may have to work on how we react to those emotions a little bit,
Mhm.
and we have the right to all of them.
Yeah.
And that's probably the basis of everything that I do therapeutically at this point. It was like, yes, you
Okay.
have the right to be mad. Yes, you have the right, you know, and we can't cuss out teachers and parents. And like,
Yeah.
you have the right to, bad things happen to you. You have the right to have any and all of these emotions. And we need to learn
Yeah.
what to do with them that's a little bit more productive.
Yes.
I had to learn that.
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
yeah. Hmm.
It's, and I think that's one of the things that when I started seeing my therapist was that was such a like mind shift that I was at the beginning so hard to make, that it's okay that I'm upset at anybody because my sister just threw a tantrum and I'm upset. And so what I used to do was I used to just lash out at everyone. Like it didn't matter. Like if I could be like at work or at school, whatever, and I would just project out because I was feeling all these things, but I never felt that it was okay to be upset at her or my parents or my situation or like the day or whatever. And so once I learned that, hey, like it's fine that you can feel that way, just like how are you going to route your energy, right? Because it's extra energy that you have, like what are you going to do with it? And
Yeah.
that was it's such a it's like I feel so different now that, hey, I can just acknowledge, hey, I'm upset, like at my sister or at my parents. I'm just gonna acknowledge that I am upset, and we're gonna go do something else with all that extra energy they have. And then, so I really like kickboxing, and that has helped immensely because it's just I get my, and I mean I love it from an exercise standpoint, and it helps me get my aggression out. So it's one of those like two for one, I think. But it's made such a difference knowing that it's okay that you have like different feelings other than happy, and it's fine. Like there's nothing wrong with that. It's normal actually.
And if you were more like me, like, I would tend to retreat in instead of lash out. Like, I had moments of it, but it was more of behaviors than actually getting like visibly and verbally aggressive or whatever.
Okay.
So for me, it was more of a shutdown, and how can we numb that and just,
Yes.
because
Yeah.
my family was we don't say much, and I don't know where I came from because now I talk all the time.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I heard that that's actually dysfunctional. Oh, that makes so much sense now. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
When I started seeing a therapist more recently, when all of this started
Mhm.
happening, and it was like, I when we finally got to the finish line, so my father's in hospice, and I have the paperwork for my brother. Like, I got the gold, I call it the pretty little gold sticker, saying that I was the guardian. And it was like,
Yeah.
like, it was just like I finally had a minute to like stop and process everything, and all of the
Yeah.
things came in, and it was like, okay, I need to talk to someone. Like, this
Yeah,
is
because
a
now
lot.
yeah, you got hit by like a bulldozer basically of
Oh,
all the things. Yeah.
I call those, and then afterwards, there's like this emotional hangover. It's like you feel like you've been out drinking, and the same physical symptoms are there, but it's emotionally related and has nothing to do with the
Exactly.
substance. Yeah.
Yes. I have
So
felt yes.
That might be one of my next blog posts. It's the emotional hangovers where you didn't actually consume anything, and to me, jet lag feels the same way. It's just,
Yeah. Yep.
and it's like, what are you gonna do with that? Right?
Yep.
Like, and how to move through it, and instead of having a maladaptive behavior, whatever that looks like, whether it's lashing out or numbing or whatever, what are you going to do with that energy to kind of move through it? Every time I have an issue with my brother, it's like, I'm closing the business. I can't do anything. Like it spirals into all of these things.
Yes. Yep. I feel it.
And it's like, no, that's actually not what's going to happen.
Yeah, like all the spiraling is such a real thing. Like as a kid I would do it all the time. And then as I got older, it was interesting when I don't even know how to explain it, but just as I would spiral in real time, people would make these either comments or like tell me I was thinking too much, or why are you so panicked about it, or like why blah blah blah. And like, which at that time did not help, because I'm 15. Like, you're not helping me, like you need to fix it. And now it's so interesting as an adult, because I've done a lot of work to help kind of work on that. And so it's this thing where I can, yeah, I'll have those like hours where I'm like, it's coming, I'm like, no, it's okay, we just need to go do something else, calm down, go for a walk. Yeah, it's just, I need to regulate so that it's okay. Like, it's like I'm gonna have, like, everyone has their like spiral moments, I guess we can call it that. But it's that the spiraling is such a real
and it has
thing.
nothing to do with what's in front of you. So it was like,
Exactly. Yes.
something that happened during my brother's meeting that I wasn't happy about, but didn't say something out loud until I processed it, and then it translated into everything else that was going on. Yes. It was like, we didn't meet our monthly goals this month, and and it was just kind of this whole, like, that particularly what was going on in my business had nothing to do with what was going on with my sib. Although it's life, right? So it doesn't matter if you have a sibling, or you're taking care of an aging parent, or or maybe you took in your niece or nephew, and then you have like it insert life issue here.
Yeah.
And then how it affects everything.
Yeah, and that's something that I started to realize kind of in the more, probably like last year or so, is this thing where someone can say something at work and has absolutely nothing to do with anything. Like, we're just at work, right? People are working, things are happening, but someone will say something, and like, it made me realize that in all my other previous jobs, I used to take those things and harbor them and be like, oh, I need to fix this for these people, or for myself, or for my supervisor, whatever. And now I'm like, no, like, no, like, those are two separate, that's nothing to do with me or my situation. It's just, they're doing their job or not doing their job or whatever, but has absolutely no connection to my life at all, and I don't need to feel like I need to own that and then fix it for anybody. And that's, yeah.
Yeah. My husband will call me out on some of that as well. Is like, is that really what's going on here?
Yep, my husband does the same thing. He asks, is that in your head, or is that actually happening in real life? And it's,
yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
No, I get it. And I think through the eyes of like the siblings, that I have a hard time with people that don't understand empathy. And so it's like, how do you even come to that conclusion? Like, do you have any clue of like the rest of the world? Like, I get this.
Yeah.
But then, it starts to spiral again. So, I mean, insert any recent event and I'm just like, I don't understand what is happening. So I literally cannot watch the news.
Yes.
Cannot, because then it goes right back to sib mode of like, if you just spent a day with me, like, maybe you would realize. And my husband's like, stop trying to save the world. I'm like, listen, like, if we would, and that kind of, my work with the Global Autism Project, and they're always bringing like behavior professionals, and I'm like, but there's other ways. Like,
Yes. Yep.
I'm
Yep.
going to make sure everything stays humane, because my brother had there was a lot of maltreatment and neglect when he was in New York, and so I just kind
Okay.
of got on this mission of like, no, 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 I'm gonna, whatever you're doing, we're gonna make sure it's humane, and
Yes.
like,
Comes from a very good. It comes from a real place. Like it's not like you're trying to just change the world. Like you're trying to make it so that it's better and more concrete, and people are more care. Like it comes from such a real place of real hurt and like want it for better.
and I have a really hard time recently, especially like in and around Tampa, going out with my brother, because I just don't feel like it's safe. Like Orlando, same thing. There's just
Yeah.
stuff happening that I'm like, what's going to happen if I am out? Like that, the fear is real.
Yeah.
And so it's just kind of like, how do you even think? Like, it just, people that don't have empathy, I have a really hard time with. So I even have like a hard time with, I take on occupational therapy students sometimes.
Okay.
And when I'm like, what are you thinking? Like, I just sometimes I'm like, what is happening right now? And my husband's like, they don't have, I'm not going to say how 40 some odd years of experience with this. And he laughs at me and was like, you have to, not everybody has the same level of experience. And so I found that, people that don't have any experience don't do well in my setting. And so if
Oh, okay.
they have to have had something.
Yeah.
I had one student who's a therapeutic recreation specialist first. That made
Okay.
sense. She did great. I even hired her. There's,
Yeah.
there was another one that did direct care.
Okay.
Totally got it. She was great.
Okay.
One that had no experience just floundered, just could not.
Oh.
And, I get, a lot of, because sometimes people can't correlate yoga and autism, or yoga and severe disability.
Okay.
And so I get the ones that are like, we've tried everything else, now what?
Oh,
And
I see. Okay. Right.
so I can get a lot of interesting cases sometimes, and not all of which I can pass off to a student, because that you really do have to have
Yeah.
that level of empathy and background to, one, not take behaviors personally, uh,
Right. Yeah.
not escalate yourself when they happen.
Yes.
And, if you've never seen somebody with profound autism that yells and does weird movements, that
Yep.
it may startle your own fight or flight without even you noticing.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what I found. So now I have a questionnaire. Like, you have to, like,
Yeah, to like kind of screen people and then
and
evaluate.
it's not to be malicious, but I want them to be
No.
successful. And for
Yeah.
some people, that's just not in their wheelhouse. And it may not ever be as a clinician. And that's okay. That's okay. That's, and just, I'd rather have a really successful experience for a student than to
Yeah.
have one that, potentially didn't work out. So,
No, and that makes sense, and I think that's something like I definitely as an adult, it makes a lot of sense when you're the student applying to like 10,000 places. You definitely don't understand that, but it's one of those look behind 2020 vision things that you
yeah.
understand in retrospect always. Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Nice. Well, I guess we'll close off with our words of encouragement. Are there any other words of encouragement you would like to give to our fellow siblings out there?
One, develop your own plan. Just have an idea in your back pocket. It doesn't have to agree or align with what your parents' plan is. Just have something in the back, and know who you can, reach out to, um, as far as that goes. And, you know, just know that, like we just talked about, that whole, all of us have been through a lot, and just know that there's other people out there that get it too.
Yeah, for sure. Cool. Well, thank you for being on the podcast.
Thank you for inviting me.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Special Needs Sibling Podcast. It's definitely a tough journey being a sibling out there, so I hope you feel encouraged listening to other siblings share their stories. Here's a couple of ways you can support the podcast. Number 1, tell all your friends. We definitely need listeners to listen to the show. Number 2, please subscribe wherever you're listening to stay up to date on new siblings sharing their stories. Number 3, you can support us on Patreon. Even a small contribution can help keep the podcast up and running. And last but not least, if you're a fellow sibling, please consider being on the show. We definitely can't keep this show going without you. Even if it seems scary getting your story out there, know that only you can tell your story, and that we're all here to support you. And even if you don't want to be recorded, that's totally fine. I'd be more than happy to chat offline with any of you out there who want to continue to build this community of special needs siblings. Until next time, this is the Special Needs Sibling Podcast.